Welcome back to this video walking through solving basic inequalities. So an inequality is when two mathematical expressions are not equal to each other. So for example, I have x plus 4 is greater than 10. It's an example of an inequality. To kind of break down this word a little bit more, we have the prefix in, which means not. So this is a prefix, right? That first part of the word, and it means not. So inequality is not, and then of course we have our root here, equal. So this is inequality, meaning not equal, which makes sense, right? Because if we look at our example here, x plus 4 is greater than 10, we can clearly see that this is an example of when the mathematical expressions are not equal to each other. So some of the inequality symbols include greater than, like I just showed you in that previous example, which we write as sort of this open-faced symbol. What sometimes help people to remember this is that this side here is bigger. And in English, we read from left to right. So we have our big side here, and then we have our small side. So this is our greater than symbol. We have our greater than, or equal to. Same basic shape, but then add a line underneath. That's our greater than or equal to. We have our less than, which is facing the other direction, and our less than or equal to. Boom. So these are the four basic symbols that we're going to be working with inequalities. You certainly make an argument that the not equal sign also applies, but we're just not going to focus on that in this video. We're really focusing on greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. Now, similar to equations, solving an inequality involves a variable. Remember, a variable is the unknown value we are looking for in, the equation, or in this case, the inequality, right? So when we were doing equations, the variable is the unknown value. It's still the same thing here, right? I have this x, I have this thing that I don't know what it is, and that we're trying to figure out, what is x, or what could x be? That's our variable. Little exclamation point so that you know that I'm excited. Just kidding. Don't want to confuse you. So, similar to equations, solving an inequality involves a variable. Now, the other thing that kind of makes the variable in inequalities different is that we use inequalities to represent situations where there are a range of, and I'm going to put this in quotes, correct answers. Really, there's a whole range of acceptable answers. Now, if we don't remember what range means like a spread or a difference. So when I say a range here, I'm really saying there are multiple or many. So like multiple, many, a wide spread. So there are lots of different, quote unquote, correct answers to an inequality. So solving an inequality is done similar to solving an equation with a few exceptions. And really the biggest one that's going to apply in this video is that when you multiply or divide with the negative, when you multiply or divide with a negative, underline that, you must swap the sign. And I'm going to show you an example of this in just a moment. But for now, if you could write, this will become greater than will become less than. Greater than or equal to would become a less than or equal to. A less than would become a greater than. A less than or equal to would become a greater than or equal to. So you can see here that the sign swaps. If you multiply or divide with a negative, if you are multiplying or dividing with a negative, you swap the sign. And we'll do an example of that in a moment because this one here is going to involve an example of that. So let's start with our two practice problems. X minus 5 is less than 12. We start solving this the same way we would, a one-step equation. So I see a minus 5 here. Let's go ahead and add 5 to both sides. That's the inverse operation. We end up with x is our only thing left over. So I have x is less than 12 plus 5 is 17. So x can be any number. X can be any number, and I actually want you to write this down. X can be any number less than 17. Can be any number less than 17. That's what this means. X less than 17 means that x could be 16. It could be 15. It could be 14. It could be negative 4,323. All of those would be that quote-unquote correct because it's less than 17. Let's look at another example of solving an inequality. I have negative 2p is greater than 14. Now remember, when you see a coefficient in front of the variable, we can imagine that there's this itty-bitty multiplication sign. Remember, we talked about invisible multiplication. Invisible. Oh yeah, so it's invisible multiplication. So the inverse operation of multiplication is division. So we have to divide by negative 2. So I'm dividing both sides by negative 2. Well, here, negative 2 divided by negative 2 is going to give me positive 1p. So I have p here. I know that 14 divided by negative 2 will give me negative 7. But we cannot forget that when you are multiplying or dividing by a negative, you must swap the sign. So because we divided by negative 2, we have to swap this greater than sign. And when you swap the greater than sign, we flip it. So let's look over here. Oh, I see. Greater than will become a less than. So this greater than sign will now become a less than. So P can be any number less than negative 7. So this answer means that P can be any number less than negative 7. We had to flip that sign because we were divided by a negative. All right, let's look at some guided practice on our next page. So we're going to solve these inequalities with just a little bit of help from me. I'll get the problem started, and then you'll just have to kind of finish through. Starting here with x minus 5 is less than 11. Start off, I got to get x by itself, right? I got to get this by itself. So add 5 to both sides because these will cancel each other out. I'm left with just x. So I have x is less than 11 plus 5 is 16. And again, what does this mean? And I want you to write this down. X can be any number less than 16. Make sure that you write this down. Write this if you haven't already. Write this. All right, next problem. 3p is greater than 12. So remember, in between that 3 and the p, there's an invisible multiplication. So it's 3 times p. So the opposite of that is division. So we have to divide both sides by 3. 3 divided by 3 gives me 1, so I'm left with 1p. 1p is greater than, I did not have to switch it because there's no negatives here. 12 divided by 3. 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. But what does that mean? It means p can be any number greater than 4. So p can be any number greater than 4. It could be a 6, it could be 25, it could be 892. P could be any number greater than 4. Next up, k plus 3 is less than or equal to 6. Well, I see a plus 3 here, so the opposite of that is minus 3. I'm just subtracting 3 from both sides. I'm left with just k on the left side, and less than or equal to 6 minus 3, which is 3. Can be 3 or any number less than 3. Another way of thinking about this is that 3 would be the maximum. 3 would be the maximum number that k could be. K can be 3 or any number less than 3. Next up, I've got negative 4n is less than 20. Remember, in between this 4 and n, there is an invisible multiplication sign. So the opposite, the inverse operation of multiplication is, of course, division. So we divide both sides by negative 4. Uh-oh, I'm dividing by negative. That's going to do something funny here. So my negative 4 divided by negative 4, it's positive 1, so I'm left with just n. 20 divided by negative 4. Remember, when you have a positive and you are multiplying or dividing by a negative, your answer is negative. So it's negative 5. And I have to swap that sign because just a reminder, if I go on the old page, we have to swap if I'm multiplying or dividing by a negative. So I divided by a negative, so I've just swapped this to be greater than. So what does this mean? It means n can be any number greater than negative 5. N is greater than negative 5. All right, it's going to be time for you now to tackle some independent practice. There's just these 3 problems here. These 3 problems for you to tackle on your own. You got this. And, of course, remember that you have the rest of this video as a great resource, as well as the equations videos if you're feeling a little stuck on, like, what actual step to take. Best of luck, and as always, remember to make good life choices.